Hi Booktube, it's Amy. I'm here with a collection of poetry today by Canadian poet John Glassco. And this is his second published volume of poetry from 1964 titled A Point of Sky. And he was the author of 4 poetry collections in total. He first published a collection called The Deficit Made Flesh in 1958, followed by this one in 1964, followed that up in 71 with a collection just called Selected Poems, which actually won him the Governor General's Award here in Canada for English language poetry that year. And 2 years later, he followed that up with a collection called Montreal. But he was also known for his fictional memoir titled The Memoirs of Montparnasse that he published in 1970, and perhaps he became even better known for that than for his poetry, which he thought was sort of the height of his craft. But he was also the author of a number of erotic works, one which I believe was published under his own name, but most which were straight up pornography published under pseudonyms. I'm most interested in his poetry, and I'm going to be checking out the other volumes of poetry as well. Probably won't check out the erotica, that's not really my thing, but I have read his Memoirs of Montparnasse, which I picked up a couple of weeks ago. And so I had a nice couple of hours, nice morning down by the lake here in Ottawa. And I just sat and I read this very slowly, and I enjoyed the air, and I think it was the perfect place to read it because this collection is very infused with the imagery of nature. In fact, some of the poems actually reminded me of the works of English poet William Wordsworth, who of course was writing 150, 200 years before Glassco was writing, but although Glassco spent some time in Paris, he of course would have been familiar with the English Romantic poets as well, and I think that definitely shows through in his works. So he grew up in an affluent Montreal family, but he was apparently also very familiar with the townships and the rural area of eastern Quebec, which also seems to make a large appearance in this collection. Lots of rural areas, lots of hills and broken down barns and country houses, and not a lot of the city. In fact, none of the city. This is very much a rural and countryside collection of poems, which I like very much. So almost all these poems have nature imagery of some kind, but some certainly do more than others. So for instance, the opening poem in this collection is an ode, The Autumn Resurrection, which I quite liked. And although it is a poem of autumn, as I was sitting down by the lake in this early spring, in fact, it's an unseasonably warm spring. It's a spring day that feels like summer. I was sitting there in 24-degree weather, skirt, t-shirt, sunscreen, sunglasses, hat, that sort of thing. Certainly not seasonable for April in this part of the world. But despite it being spring instead of autumn, the opening stanzas of this poem really resonated with me and with that experience of sitting there. Because Glassco begins by saying, "This day is beautiful. It could not ask of earth or sun or sky one farther grace, one blessing more, that surelier should make it lovely some way to all mankind. Yet though I feel this influence and accept these gifts with simple pleasure, I, for whom occasion is one half of beauty, and in whose heart unseasonable youth takes most joy in unseasonable things." And to me, you know, it's a little bit, the weather was literally, and is today literally, unseasonable, but I think he's talking also in this poem about age, because age and sort of timelessness and the passing of time and reaching sort of that end of your life are also quite prominent within this collection here. So the Autumn Resurrection has great nature imagery, but also one called A House in the Country, and Lucy's Notch, which is perhaps the most Wordsworthian poem in this collection, which is about, at a basic level, it's about a rural road that has since been closed and he can no longer access it. A tumble down barn, an old homestead that he saw up in the hills that he meant to go back and visit. He didn't stop the first time he saw it because, of course, he thought he was going to be there again, but the road closed, the years went by, and he never went back. But it's got this great opening here. He writes, "Here's where the road ends, on this windy height over Bolton Wood, where 15 years ago I climbed one summer day, turned round and stopped, amazed at the beauty of the valley's scene, from the stones of Lucy's ruined doorway. Then I would come back some day, I thought, and so turned my back to it and kept climbing on, walking between my two-wheeled cart, while Phyllis plodded between the shafts, her chestnut flanks wrinkling, straining, her head between her knees, as the road became a pathway, lost its face, in hummocks, boulders, chattering streams, and then died in a thin, flat meadow fenced with stones. A place enclosed where the surrounding slopes ran out so far the view was quite cut off, and at the farther end a rutted gap gave on the ruins of a grassy lane, which following we came at last down and out on the road to Saint Etienne. Never again did I go that way, and never shall. The road is blocked now, see, not only choked with brush and saplings, but inalterably sealed." And he goes on talking about that and how he really should have stopped that day. And then he goes on to sort of muse philosophically about nature and how his relationship to nature and to life really has changed over the years. He talks about the sense of being unable to possess a natural scene or to be possessed by it. And he ends it with this sentiment of yearning and aching, and so become each day more closely bound to what you are, more closely bound to what nature is. And so I quite liked that one. And there's also some wonderfully dark imagery in this collection of poems. He brings up the ideas of death, not usually directly, but sort of subtly and through euphemism. He brings up the idea of death. There is mention of time and timelessness, the idea that at a certain point you will cease to exist within time, and talk of memory and existence in general. But some of the lines do get quite dark. We have a poem here called "The Day," which has a line that I had to stop and underline. I'll read you a little bit of the stanza before we get to that line. So he writes, "So on that day, that final day, removed from time, dependent on nothing, when nothing will matter, you will escape like a mouse in the darkness." You will escape like a mouse in the darkness. And I've got this image of in my mind of a tiny mouse, an insignificant creature, a creature that you look down on that really means nothing. And he's sort of made a comparison to a human being nothing more than a mouse in the darkness. Himself perhaps being nothing more than a mouse in the darkness that will escape and disappear. The dream be ended, the city forgotten, the shadow will touch you, engross you wholly, softly, securely, and soon, the day of others, freed of your sickness, their own little day, serene, newborn, the day of their freedom, dawn quietly without you. And it's this idea that everyone is going to go on after you've died. They are going to find their freedom without you, and they are perhaps going to sort of rationalize your death, put it in their own context and allow them to move forward, and you will be gone and you will be insignificant. And we also have a poem here called "The Crows." Once again, nature imagery of animals in these poems. There's one called "The Crow where he's once again talking about memory and the void and death. He writes here, "Gone are the partings and the wounds. All the words of farewell have returned to silence. All the shadows under the arches to darkness, and the habit and refrain of memory tumbles into the void like a stale provincial motto. This is the house the crows have opened, the apple garden," and there goes a fire truck perhaps, or an ambulance. We've got a fire station nearby and also a paramedic station nearby. And I do unfortunately have the windows open today, so I'm sorry if you're hearing that. We will just pause a minute. There it goes. I think it's gone. Gone are the partings and the wounds. All the words of farewell have returned to silence. All the shadows under the arches to darkness, and the habit and refrain of memory tumbles into the void like a stale provincial motto. This is the house the crows have opened, the apple garden, the dream of Arthur. Out of the skyrack the light pursued, out of silence the notes are coming. And I just love this really dark imagery, this really philosophical musing on memory and being and death here. But there's also some humorous and witty poems in this collection. Two of my favorites are titled "After Reading 7 Very High-Class Current English Novels Sent to Me in a Parcel," and directly next to it in the volume is "Lines Addressed to a Dozen Young Canadian Poets After Unwisely Devouring 5 Little Magazines at a Sitting." And I think of the two, "After Reading 7 High-Class English Novels" is my favorite. I should have taken note of the page number here, but I will flip and find them here. Yeah, so basically the premise is he's read 7 very high-class current English novels that someone sent to him. And this stanza here: "Having seen sex served up again and again with tireless hilarity like a pig on a plate, having learned dozens of funny surnames, refreshed, well documented on all the varieties of titter." So this is just a great collection, and if you've not read any John Glassco before, and you're looking for a new poet to try out, this might be something good to pick up. And I just have a cheap reprint here. You can see from the back, it looks like it could possibly just be a print-on-demand thing. But back in the day, it was published by the Canadian branch of the Oxford University Press, and there are several different collections of his poetry available online. Amazon's got it. I'm sure you can find him pretty much anywhere.